Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the All Tens podcast with your host, Clay Harris. That's me. And Josh West. That's him. He's going to say hi.
Hi.
Thank you. We're in the middle of a series around the 5 leadership abilities. If you're here, hopefully you've already listened to Simplify, Delegate, Predict. And today we're talking about number 4, which is Systemize. Joshy, tell us a little bit about Systemize.
So at the highest level, this is, do we have our processes documented in such a way where everyone can execute on that process and do it the right and best way every single time? And when I think about systemizing the business, this is certainly in the early days of an organization completely gets ignored. There's one person, and that one person turns into 5 people. And still, we don't need to document a process. Everybody knows what everyone else is doing inside of the organization. And surprisingly, you get into some very successful, long-standing organizations, plenty of revenue, and this is one that really starts to stand out. And it's easy to understand how we get here and then why it ultimately is required at a certain level. And the way I think about this, Clay, is as an example, let's think about we've got a nice document and it's formatted great. There's a lot of color, laser jet printer. It's fantastic. And we go stick that in a copier and we make a copy. And the content remains there. We lose the color on it. Now it's in black and white, but we've still got the content there. But then when we go to make another copy, we use the black and white copy. And once we get 6 to 7 generations removed, half of the content is no longer there. And you see this a lot inside of organizations with that tried and true method that I've seen so many times, each one teach one. So founder, early stage member, then delegates, passes on some other task to someone. So they've gotten great at delegating, and we talked about that in a prior episode, but there was no documentation to come along with that. And then that person's teaching the next person, and then that person, and so on and so forth. So then ultimately we get to a point to where everybody's kind of doing it their own way. Our customers are having different experiences with our organization. One technician goes out and greets a customer this way, writes up a quote one way. Somebody else gets something completely different. And then before you know it, it's scattered. And we've got to bring it back in and make sure that we all understand what the major processes are inside of the organization, and making sure that everyone who touches that process understands chronologically what are these high level steps, right? We take that 20/80 approach. We're not trying to document the entire world and end up with a 300-page SOP that no one's ever going to look at, right? Does everybody who touches a process simply understand how work comes to them, how work leaves them? And also, it's easy to train new people who come into the organization for them to understand at a high level what the steps are in those processes. And inevitably, when we need to update them, it's easy to update that simplified document and then simply retrain people, make sure that we're measuring and managing along the way, and then updating as necessary and repeat. And then it really is that foundation of that consistency that then can propel you to be able to scale. But as long as everything is scattered and we're not doing things the right way every time, and we've got no systems in place, then it's just going to continue to fray.
You've described it from 2 different ways, and I want to clarify the thinking for our listeners out there who are leaders. And I'm going to shout out this book here. You see my U.S. library on my bookshelf here.
Right off
But this
there.
book, the process book from the EOS library, is the best, is my favorite. And they're all, it's like having children. None of them are none of them are the best, but this one is my favorite. Everybody who has kids knows you do have a favorite kid. I hope my kids don't listen to this. It's both of them. But when I'm talking about process with clients, or if I'm a business owner listening to this, I know that the natural reaction is like, that sounds like a ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds really hard. It sounds overwhelming. We do this every 6 months already, and it never goes anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Does that sound like what your clients might say to you? It's what my clients say to me. Say it again.
People want to avoid this.
People want to avoid it. And so This is both, I think, the most like kind of impactful one potentially, and the one that people like actively avoid the most, right? And so I think a thing that you said that I want to make sure our listeners hear is the 2080 approach. Can you give us a little bit more on what you mean when you say 2080?
So what are the 20% of the steps that are going to get you 80% of the results that you're looking for in that process? Trust that the little small details will handle themselves. You've hired competent individuals to execute on that work, right? We don't need every nth degree of detail in it, just so that everyone who's working on that process, because inevitably, like usually it's not just one person. We've got to work cross-functionally here, but chronologically within any of those processes, maybe there's 10 major steps. So also what we're doing with that is we're avoiding very large mistakes. And it's okay if the fine details are a little bit different from one to another, but in the instance of a restaurant, everyone's going to come in, be greeted by the hostess, seated, handed a menu, order. Someone's going to cook it, bring it to you, make sure everything's okay throughout the meal, and bring you your meal, and then you pay the bill, and then you leave. That's it. That's the process, right? How you walk from the kitchen to the table is not necessary to document, right? So that's the 20A approach that I'm talking about.
Document the 20% of the steps that happen every time that get you 80% of the way there, and trust that the right people in the right seats will get it across the finish line.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, man, if everybody listening could do that for the handful of core processes that exist within your business, we say 8 to 10 processes exist within every truly core process exists within every business. If you could do that, you've gotten most of the value out of your head around the systemize strength, right? If you can do that and let them run, all the other stuff happens. It really requires you to simplify and delegate and do a good job of predicting and all those sorts of things. So it's not easy, but it is super important. So 100% agree. Let's do any nuggets when you're teaching. Oh, you had something else. Sorry.
Well, I was going to point out, you brought up the book,
Yeah.
Clay, and as our listeners know or may not know, there are 6 key components that we strengthen with our clients in the journey that we take with them. But the process book was published first, and I think there's something to that, right? Of all of the components that could have been chosen for the first deep dive book in the Traction Library, it was Process came out first. So
also written by our hero Mike Payton, just as a
shout out to Peyton. And
That's
I'll
right.
let that stand as my nugget for everyone. Go pick up the Process book. It's important. What do you got for him, Clay?
Nuggets on process. Man, I think the thing that you said stole it. Document 20% of the steps that happen that get you 80% of the results. Then trust everything else that you're doing within EOS to get you there. You have a scorecard. You have right people, right seats. You have regular meetings with leadership teams, and your departments are running their L10s. Trust that if you follow that process that Josh laid out, 20% of the steps to get 80% of the results, train people on it, measure and manage to it, update it when it gets out of date, and then repeat. You're doing all the work that you need to do to build up the systemized muscle for your leadership abilities. Good?
Yeah, don't overthink it and don't overdo it. I've seen overdoing, and it's wild. No one's ever going to read that or update it ever again. Keep it minimal.
That's right. Cool. Well, speaking of keeping it minimal, I'm going to wrap up this podcast, Joshy, if that's okay with you.
Take them home, Clay.
Cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to the All Tens podcast. We're so happy you're here. We'd really appreciate it if you could rate the meeting at the end or the podcast at the end. 10 if it was a good use of your time. If it was lower than that, that's awesome. Just make sure you leave some feedback so that we know how to get better. We love sharing our thoughts and ideas with you, but we love hearing from you more. So until next time, I'm Clay, he's Josh, and we'll see you later.
See you next time. Bye, Clay.
Bye.